Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Supernatural, a great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, there's a whole situation with, Amara kind of enjoying, she's in Iceland, she's enjoying it, but then she sees the signs of like, oh yeah, bro's here. And I guess because he had to make a moment of it because like a whole bunch of shooting stars, the Aurora Borealis is kind of doing its thing. So I was like, is that the general sign or is that him being like, I'm home type of situation? I'm assuming it's probably the latter. Or it could be both. Maybe just because I don't think there's really, because it's such a specific thing. Like he probably wanted her specifically to know that he was back, but whatever the case may be. So it's basically down to the wire because obviously Sam and Cassio are doing whatever they can to try and fix this situation, try to find another way. But Dean's like, okay, so you're just going to ignore me? But it's like, you're going to try and find a way. But for Sam, it's like, we have to, like, I'm not going to let, Jack die. But like for Dean, it's like, this has to happen. Amara shows up and, it's just like, oh. And for her, it's like, yeah, because she's under the impression like, oh, we're going to trap Chuck. And it's like, you're on the right side. You're doing what's right for humanity and everything. And she's like, yeah, because she's like, we've always we're there for each other, It's kind of what she was saying. And it makes it even more heartbreaking because you're like, Dean's betraying your trust and everything. So Amara's 100% on board. And to me, I never really thought about it in the grand scheme of things. I mean, to be fair, like, Amara's always been a tragic character because she is just the darkness and everything. She is the flip side to everything. You'd always looked at her as kind of the bad guy until, like, she kind of wasn't. She's been very neutral at the, in the grand scheme of things. But it's like you think because she's the darkness is all evil. And Chuck is, he's God, he's the light and everything. And it's just interesting that, Chuck is creation, she's destruction. Yet Amara's the one that's like, don't destroy this world. She's the one pining for this, like she's the one fighting for this world not to be destroyed, and Chuck, its creator, is all like, nah, we need to reset. I think that's interesting because I even love that whole conversation. Like, he reveals himself to her and everything, and he was like, oh yeah, you've been listening to the Winchesters. Ugh. It's like, yeah, you and Dean have always had that thing. She's like, you didn't write that? He was like, no, why? Ew, gross. Why would I do it? Because it makes sense. It's like, why would you like write a story where your sisters get? It's like, ew, gross, weird, no, But that's kind of interesting because that means the thing between Dean and her, like, that was always kind of a genuine thing. But you saw the look on her face being, like, happy about it. She's always had an affinity for Dean, but I think it's so interesting because I find that so fascinating because I think she genuinely, like, had a thing for Dean. And I think that's so interesting. And I think for her, she liked it because she was like, oh, yeah, like, so that means what's between us is real. So I think that made it feel like, I think it's the only other connection she's probably felt with any other being. There's even that moment with Jack. It's like, oh, like, you're going to be the one. And she's like, okay. She's like, I wish I had had an opportunity to get to know you better. She's like, that's kind of on me. But she's like, maybe when this is all said and done, we can. I was like, oh, I mean, this is her, what is it? Great nephew? Would that be I can never remember because obviously like Lucifer's her nephew and this is his kid, so I think that's like her, whatever the case may be. Regardless of everything, I just thought that was, it's just, you can tell how much it pains Jack because it's like Amara's not the bad person in this case, but it's like to maintain some sort of balance, she has to go when Chuck goes, And if you straight up kill Chuck despite everything, because of their connection, it's like they were kind of born into this existence. They came into existence together. They are two sides of the same coin. That it's like she would not be okay with them killing her brother. Like obviously that sent her probably spiraling. Like yeah, her and her brother don't get along, but it's like it'd be the same thing as like Sam and Dean being like, oh, do you want would you be okay if someone killed your brother? No, because it's happened in the past and you super weren't okay, so it kind of it plays into that. It's actually interesting. I didn't even think of the parallels until near the end of the episode, but basically it's like the two siblings. You have Sam and Dean going through their issues and you have Amara and Chuck. It didn't correlate, like I said, it didn't correlate in my head of like, oh yeah, like, both of them are kind of like, Sam and Amara are kind of the same, and then Chuck and Dean are kind of the same in a certain regard. So those are the parallels, and I thought that was so fascinating, especially because Amara's trying, it's like, oh, well, look at what you made, and he's like, he's like, what are you going to talk about my first tree being perfect? She's like, well, wasn't it? He's like, it was pretty cool. It was pretty dope, But for him, he talks about the fact is that he's just so tired of it all. Like, it's just, all these worlds were just constant reminders of his mistakes. But she's just kind of talking about, like, oh yeah, the beauty of everything. And humans, he's like, no, humans, they're shitty. They're terrible, And obviously, Amara's trying to take him on a trip to, like, change his mind. She takes him to heaven. It's like, oh, I want you to meet these people who are so devoted to you. But like for him, he got annoyed by it because she's like, oh, can oh my god, I mean, well, yeah, your guy. She's like, could you sign this? And she's like, can you go sign it for Tilly? And he's like, yeah, sure. But she's actually, that's a nickname. Could you sign it? And it's actually, he's like, all right. He's like, okay, I didn't actually kill them. I sent them away. It's just like. He's like, he's like, the whole thing about don't meet your idols. He's like, it goes both ways. But Amara's just kind of like, it was meant to be a show of just like some people's love and devotion for you, like their belief in you, that people love you so much, they're devoting themselves to you. And it's just like, you can't do the same. It's just for Chuck, it's just like, I'm just done, So I just thought that was an interesting thing. And then like having her being the one that kind of locks him in the bunker, being like, he's like, I'm, adios. And then it's like, he can't go anywhere. And she's like, I've done, like, I can't hold you forever, but I can hold you long enough until you get caged. Which even that in itself is kind of interesting too, because obviously, once again, that's actually a big running theme in this series, because obviously it's always been a sibling thing, whether it's God and, Chuck and Amara, Lucifer and Michael, Sam and Dean. It's been this thing. Like, obviously, the main theme of the show has always been a brother's relationship, Sam and Dean's relationship. That's always, it's become, it's basically the focal point of the entire show. Like, from the beginning, obviously, there's other things, but it's always been their ties, their connections. That's always been the fuel, the heart to this show, So I just thought that was so fascinating. But obviously, like, Sam is like, no, we have to find another way, But obviously, Dean's like, Chuck needs to go. But it's like, Jack, he's family. And it's like, but Dean is like, no, he's not. You and me, family. Cass, family. That kid, it's like, I care for the kid and everything. And Jack overhears this, which is so sucky because and it's so heartbreaking because it's like, the sad thing is, at one point in time, Dean would have thought of, him as family. Because you're talking about the kid who, let's not forget, literally burned away the last of his soul to make sure to save you from Michael. Like, save all of you from Michael. Like, that, family's willing to do and sacrifice any, that love and, like, his willingness to do that. He's doing it now because, once again, in his own mind, he thinks, if I do this, maybe Sam and Dean won't hate me. Maybe Cass won't hate me. Maybe they can be on the way to forgive me. Because the person's forgiveness he wants the most is Dean's. And he thinks, if I do this, maybe Dean will forgive me, And it's like, they have that, quiet drive. And he's like, and like, he's like, no, I understand, Dean. Like, he's like, I'm not like Sam. I'm not like Cass. He's like, you don't have to be sorry. He's like, I understand, and it's like, because like, it's there. Because he's so blinded by his rage. He's blinded by his need to kill Chuck. He's blinded by also, like, because I think that's also what keeps him from completely forgiving Jack, I think. To some extent, I think it plays a small role in that, because I think, especially now knowing that, like, Chuck, this is the only way to end things is by Jack, because I think if Jack gets wiped away too, it clears the air a little bit for him. He's not kind of suffocating in this anger towards Chuck, towards Jack. Like, I think he needs to hold on to that anger towards Jack, because if he cares, he's going to try and interfere like Sam is, and he's like, I need Chuck going. So if I need to stay a little mad, and just, even if I'm conflicted, because I obviously care about the kid, it's like, even if that's the case, that he needs to hold on to it, because his anger and need for Chuck to be going, it outweighs everything. And then lo and behold, they meet Adam, and it's like, whoa. And it was really interesting to find out, wait, this has been Adam's this has been Adam's plan the entire time. He's actually the one that went to like death about it. He's like, oh yeah, he's been festering on this for like 300,000 years, because for him it's like, yeah, you know, me and Eve got kicked out the garden. It's like we felt like we deserved it, but then what did God do? He moved on to our kids, you know. And it's like, obviously for Adam, he hates, you know. And it's so interesting because he's kind of in the same boat, you know. It's interesting in that regard because I also forgot about the other siblings too, because I'm like, yeah, there are other biblical siblings, Cain and Abel, that whole situation. Once again, it's just, you know, I think biblically, like, that whole brother and thing has always been a thing, but obviously that, like I said, being a through line in the show. Regardless, going back to the point I was making, then like he's with that angel Sarah, and she's like, you know, talking about the visions she's had and stuff like that. He's like, and Daniel's like, oh, so basically you were tripping balls and you had a visions of Jack. She's like, yeah. He's like, yeah, that's awesome. But she's like, think about it. Like, everything that had to happen, everything that's going down to get you to this very point. It's just, and that makes you go like, it's kind of crazy to think about where we started off. Where did this adventure start for them? I mean, truth be told, is where did their story start? I mean, well, hell, you can even go back further depending on the situation, but it's like, this whole series, let's just start with the series. It started with, at the very beginning, Azazel. Isn't that Yellow Eyes his name? I always forget. I believe so. Azazel killing their mom, this being a whole thing. The whole thing was a long road to get Sam to be in a position to be Lucifer's, you know, potentially, but it was always meant to be Sam. It was always meant to be Lucifer's vessel. So, you know, but it's like, even at the beginning, like, you know, it's like it started with two brothers finding their dad and everything. So it's just a lot when you think about it in the grand scheme of things. Like, a lot of things had to play out a certain way to get us to this point. So Jack has to take a test where he has to find like a particular rock, because it's like you need like a spark of divinity to be the final ingredient. And so Jack picks a rock, and he's like, and you know, you can tell home dude's kind of like, oh, but then it's like, no, he's like, it's actually all of them, because God, they're all divine because they've all been touched by God, because God's in everything. And Adam's like, yes, at least he's supposed to be, you know. So, and they give him one of his ribs. It's like, anything can be kind of a vessel for the power, but this is so powerful it can give life. But it's like, the moment this spark, once the fuse is lit, there's no going back. Basically turning Jack into a gigantic celestial black hole that will suck up anything, you know. So that becomes the thing of like, okay, so only do this when the time comes. But Dean, you know, on the drive back stops, you know, and talks to Jack. He's like, I didn't have the right to say that. You didn't deserve to hear that, considering everything you're doing right now. You're doing for us. You're doing for humanity by removing Chuck and Amara. He's like, ever since he found out the truth about, like, nothing in his life has been his own, he's like, I feel trapped. He's like, I don't have freedom, not true freedom. And that's what bugs him. Because it makes sense when you think about it. Like, Dean has always been following someone else's orders. Like, he's all, like, you know, Sam has always kind of been able to have his freedom, because you can make an argument like Dean, and Sam kind of says, like, oh, you protect me. It's like, Dean became that soldier for their dad. And he's, you know, so Sam was able to go off to college and kind of, you know, Dean kind of filled that void so his brother could almost have, you know, some normalcy of a life, to some form of a life. And I think he's always felt like he was always being pulled by other people, but now it's like to find out, like, nothing in your life, like everything you've ever experienced, everything that's ever gone down has been basically Chuck writing, you know, a book, a story, you know. So it you know, and I always say that's actually it never correlated in my head to think about it, but like, obviously, like, somebody can take comfort in knowing, like, you know, because some people believe, obviously, like, everything happens for a reason. So I take that as like maybe predestined, you know, like, oh, everything's, well, it doesn't necessarily mean that like it's meant to be a thing of like predestination. Like, not saying that someone believes that like everything is kind of written in stone, that it's always going to play out this way. Not necessarily, but it's just, I think someone can take comfort in knowing, like, there probably could be some comfort in knowing that literally everything is happening for a reason, but also just because it's all laid out, being like, yeah, this is how things are supposed to go. This is the way your life is supposed to go. This is how events are supposed to go. Like I said, just the whole thing of like, because even I'm like, maybe that's not necessarily the same thing. Destination, everything predetermined is the word I'm trying to say. Predetermined and things happening for a reason don't necessarily correlate. They're not always like, they're not necessarily the same thing. It could be, but that's not, but it's so interesting because Dean is on the other side of that, the extreme of like, no, to believe like, because humans, there's this whole thing where you think like, oh, we have a choice, we have freedom, but it's like, no, every choice that's ever everything that's ever happened to you, every choice that you've ever made in your entire life has been someone else's script. So how can you feel free? Like Dean's like, he's always felt trapped in his own life, everything. But then it's like, for the first time, we can be free because we can do whatever we want to. We're not going by someone else's script. We're not doing what other people want us to. We can finally be free. So he's thanking Jack for that. And Jack's like, you're welcome. And obviously it's go time. So, they take the bone and everything. And it melts and Jack gets souped up. At the same time, obviously Castiel and Sam, they're hitting dead ends. It's like, there's nothing we can do to change this. Obviously, but it's like, because even Sam had said it to Jack, he's like, I wish you had told us about it. He's like, but willing to sacrifice yourself takes courage. He's like, it still feels wrong to me. Like, he wants to find another way because it's just, but when it's all said and done, though, Sam wants to talk to Billy because he's like, yes, something about this doesn't feel right. And luckily they're looking for a key that would take them. And once again, I think that's such an interesting thing about like, oh yeah, here's all this shit in the bunker that they've never used. And once again, I think it's funny. It's not only are we in the final season, we're in the final episode. It's like, oh, here's some crazy shit that's been in this bunker the entire time. You just never knew. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, there's so much history for the Men of Letters. Of course, there's going to be so much stuff in there that never gets messed with. I mean, it makes sense. Like, it's like, it's like anything, because I'm sure it's like, I never finished the series. I need to go back and finish it. But like Warehouse 13, there's so much stuff in that warehouse that they never tackled and never touched. And, so it makes sense in the grand scheme of things. But regardless, I just think that's so interesting. It's kind of my whole point. It's just, I just like that. It's like, oh, here's all this stuff that like never popped up in the show. It makes you wonder, it's like, could those objects be like little winks and nods? So like, yeah, this would have been a potential storyline in the show. We just never found out what we wanted to write a story around that. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. It's just, I'm sure some of it, that's just kind of, because obviously at one point he's holding a cup and everything, and I'm like, obviously there's like some like religious stuff there, and I'm like, those are probably just supposed to be like winks and nods to like, yeah, there's just so much history here. We just never covered it. It's just like kind of showing you just how vast the Men of Letters situation was. Regardless, tangents and all that. They find the key. Sam goes in there and there's dead Reapers. I was like, wait, what? And then part of my brain started immediately going conspiracy mode. I was like, oh my God. I was like, Billy's not really Billy. It's God in disguise. He was disguising himself the entire time. That's what I was starting to think was happening. But it's like, no, the person killing the Reapers is the Empty. So, which also, did they ever bring that up before? They talked about the fact is the Empty's like, oh, I can't ever go to Earth. I can only go there with permission. It's just, it's God's little way of kind of protecting his little situation. But obviously it's like, she reveals this whole thing has been Billy's plan to take over the spot. And I was like, wait, what? It's like, yeah, she wants Amara, she wants, Chuck going because she wants to take over the position, become the new god. I'm sure removing it's necessary because it's like, well, you need someone powerful enough to do this whole thing to end this all. Him being a Nephilim and everything, it's like obviously the key component, as Adam was saying. But what's interesting though to think about, it's like Jack would probably be the only other person in existence that could probably like deal with her. So removing probably the only other being in existence that could probably like deal with death to that extent, I think it's kind of interesting. But what I found so fascinating though, it's like that's kind of her grand plan and everything, because she wants everything to go back to the way it was. Angels in heaven, demons in hell. Everyone's supposed to be where they're supposed to be, because there's supposed to be a balance to this whole thing. But the fact is, because Chuck is Chuck, has there ever really been a balance? I guess it's because Chuck technically wrote the rules. He just screwed up and he set the rules in stone when he made everything. But I guess it's like you kind of flip the script every so often, because once again, Billy was never a fan of the fact of the matter is the Winchesters are supposed to be dead. You're not supposed to be able to come back that was always Death's thing because he always fascinated, but it's also because, well, that was also like Chuck's part and all that too, because he never wanted to get rid of like, those were his favorite humans. Obviously, they're no longer his favorite humans, but so for her, she wants everything to be the way it is, and obviously the empty I want quiet. I want to be able to go to sleep. And it's like, obviously she has trust issues, so she's trying to track down Billy, but it makes you wonder, what is Billy up to? Because Billy was like, I'm not in this part of the story, which is interesting because like you're so much in the story, like, or are you lying just so you can not be in a situation where they can find out what you're really up to? I thought that was kind of fascinating, but it's like, obviously they have Death's book, God's Death book, but it's like, well, the only person that can read it is Death themselves. Billy's the only one. But like Sam, it's like, all right, we'll get you the quiet you want. Just, either you let me go and we win, or you kill me now and we lose. So obviously the empty, it's like, well, obviously the empty has trust issues, but it's just like, I need this done so I can get back to my sleep. So it's like a constant ringing headache being awake. It's annoying as hell. So Sam comes back, and now it turns into the whole situation. It's like, oh, they're going to trap you, is what, Amara's telling Chuck. But Chuck's like, oh, no, they're going to kill us. That's the plan. It was never a plan to cage us. And it's so interesting because, like, Sam is trying to stop Dean, and it turns into that thing. And then you immediately, like, this whole conflict that was like, this was whole, and then Chuck's breaking it down. This has been his whole thing. He's like, I can't read my own death book, but I can push a little wink here and there. Oh, Sarah had some visions about me. Wink, wink. I pushed and prodded, like, in my own way. Billy, I goaded Death a little bit. It's kind of what he was saying. Like, for him, it's like, I might not be able to see how my story ends. I'm still the master of time and space. I control everything else. I'm like, what do you guys not get about omniscient? Like, I can do like, he set this in motion. This has always been his plan. Because remember the lady that was a big fan of Chuck in the Supernatural books? Like, she saw his true ending to this. And we just haven't circled back to that. She's like, oh my God, this is the most tragic thing ever. Because this was supposed to be his ending. His what's the word? Magna opus? Is that the word I'm looking for? Oh, I'm such an uncultured idiot. But nevertheless, this is supposed to be his everything, And it's sad, like, learning this truth, Amara gets heartbroken. Because once again, she thought what happened between her and Dean, it's like, oh, it was real. And, and it's what I said before. Dean had said, oh, I'd never hurt you. But it's like, you can hurt someone in more ways than one, not just physically. Yeah, it's like, physically you won't be the one to hurt her, but emotionally you are. You broke her heart. And he was talking about the fact that Chuck is like, that's humans for you. They break your heart. And obviously she's so heartbroken, but he's like, we can start over and kind of leave this all behind together. Because obviously for her, she was saying like, let's work together and balance. He just wasn't down for it. But now it's like, no, let's do it. Like I said, it's so interesting because as Sam and Dean are having their confrontation, they're kind of having this. And similar things happen. Rather than like things coming to blows, it comes to a unity. Because I actually think that's like the name of the episode, if I'm not mistaken. Like, I think it's called The Unity. I could be mistaken. It's something with unity in the title, but I thought that was so interesting. The fact of the matter is, Dean is like, I don't care if Billy wants to become God. She can do whatever she wants to. I just want Chuck out the damn way. Even to the point he's pulling like a gun on Sam. He then hits Sam because he needs this done. But then like Sam's like, stop, like there has to be a different way. We don't have to do this. Because our whole thing is always like, we always try to find another way. Like, this doesn't feel right, Dean. This isn't the right thing to do. But Dean is so like, I need Chuck gone. So whatever happens, what needs to happen, fine. But then, Sam is like, you can't do this because everyone will go back to where they are. Because Sam didn't bring it up, but because it's like the ripple effect of like, where is everyone supposed to be? Cass is supposed to be in heaven. What about your situation? You two are supposed to be dead multiple times over. You were always supposed to probably be dead before now, but it's like, because they've died multiple times over the course of this series, so it's like, but even him being like, Eileen, like, she's supposed to be dead, so she will be back being dead. What about Bobby and Charlie? They'll go back to Apocalypse World. Oh wait, that doesn't exist anymore. They'll be thrown back to a place that doesn't exist anymore. So, it's like, That's the ripple effects. He's even saying, like, all the people we saved, they were supposed to die, right? They die. Like, everything that we've ever done, all the people we've, like, so much of our lives will be turned upside down by this simple choice of us doing this, you know? But for Dean, it's like, I don't care. He's like, I will cast everything and everyone aside for this. And I'm like, that's fucked up. The fact is, he's so consumed by his own rage, because that's what Chuck was about, because he's like, oh, the tragedy of it all. Dean always on the seat of doubt. He's always on the edge of doubt, but the fact of the matter is, he always kind of gets pulled one way because of his anger. Then Sam always, the tragedy of always wanting to figure, like, this was supposed to be that, because obviously we saw earlier in the season how their story was playing out in, like, either, in other worlds, not, but how Chuck was going to write this ending. We saw the multitude of ways it was going to play out. Whether it was playing out like that in other parallel worlds, or whether those were just endings Chuck was. I don't remember the context of that episode where you got to see, like, all the different ways things kind of played out. But but then Sam says it. He's like, "Would you sacrifice me?" Which is effed up, because you're right in front of Cass. You talk about Cass being family. That means, but it's like, well, at least he'll be in heaven. But it's like, whatever. It's like, the fact is, you're willing to cast aside everything, the people you've come to care about, these people if it means getting rid of Chuck. He's like, I need him gone. His anger's just, once again, it's understandable, because your entire life, everything that's happened, because you thought, like, you at least thought, like, when the people you care about are being taken from you, whether it's, the situation with your dad, with your mom, the people that have come and gone in your life, like, at the very least, you're thinking, okay, it sucks, but this is just the random shit that is the world. To find out it was all planned, that it was all calculated, that it was someone else concocting that, is infuriating, and you can understand that, so. But, Sam is like, the fact of the matter is, he's like, I get it. Finding out that Chuck has been running our lives, he's like, I get it. But for him, it's like, despite everything, the one thing I could always count on in my life is you protecting me. Protecting me from Dad. Protecting me from Lucifer. He's like, I've always counted on that. So he's like, please, just listen to me and trust me. We can find a different way. And Dean puts down his gun, but as he does that, Chuck comes out. He's like, really? He's like, I planned this whole thing out, and this is how it's going to play out. It's like, even at the end, it still wasn't enough to kind of push things towards the end. So Chuck still doesn't get the end he wants, because they never play the roles they're supposed to. He's like, Castiel, he's like, literally every other version of Castiel does what they're supposed to. They fall in line. But you didn't, because you're broken. He's like, that's the thing about this world. It's broken. Each and every one of you is broken, which is effed up considering the fact that Chuck doesn't realize that he's the broken one in this. But he's like, you know what? I'm done. He's like, you know what you can do? You can, sit here and watch Jack die. And so we see Jack going supernova, and it's like, the fact of the matter is, like, once it started, that fuse is lit, there's no going back. So it's like, Jesus, dude. We've only got 3 episodes left, dude. And I'm so curious to see, like, is there a way to stop this? Where is Billy? Especially now it's kind of like, oh, your plan isn't working out. Especially because he's fused with Amara. So, like, who knows if, like, their plan to use Jack would even work on him right now, considering, like, it seems like, he's light and dark. I mean, maybe Amara being inside of him might be the key factor in shifting this whole thing. Who knows? Once again, the only person who knows how this story ends fully is Billy, but it makes you wonder, like, Billy is probably in a position where obviously she's getting something out of this. She wants to become the next god to kind of bring balance to everything again, put everything back to the way it's supposed to. She wants things back to the true status quo. So it begs the question, like, what other surprises are we going to find, going forward? I'm curious to kind of see how this whole, situation ends up playing. I'm so curious to see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.